So everyone, welcome to the first of the workshops for today. This is actually, this workshop is an outgrowth of a series of workshops I've done over the years on use of narrative structure when communicating research findings. And this can be in a paper or a grant application. We'll mainly focus today on how to use narrative structure in the context of writing academic papers. And it's an extension, and by extension I mean that there's a way in which, a pretty concrete way of leveraging narrative structure when talking about science, but that structure needs to be propelled by several other kinds of aspects of writing that are related but distinct from the overall structure. So that's what we're talking today. So the main agenda for today revolves around a few different things. We'll talk a bit about narrative structure. We'll give you a brief recap of what that is. There are several full-length presentations of this topic that exist elsewhere. After, when we get to the Q&A, I'll just post all of these links, all the links in the workshop, I'll just post them in the chat window. We'll just talk a bit about what that structure is, so that if you haven't seen those presentations or haven't read relevant text on this topic, you'll at least get a sense of what we mean by narrative structure. Then we're going to go in, take a deep dive into something that we call writing mechanics. Writing mechanics, if you haven't taken if you think back to like your English lit class or your writing class from undergrad, if you haven't been there in a while, writing mechanics are basically the use of things like transition words, moving from one paragraph to another, those kinds of decision points, that are like the part and parcel of building a piece of work, like a manuscript. We'll talk a bit about how those writing mechanics factor into using narrative structure when you're writing. And then we'll do a couple of group activities that are relevant or that might give you examples of how to apply writing mechanics to your own writing. All assigned homework. That just a heads up that I will be assigning homework, and I encourage you to complete the homework. I don't know if any of you have attended a workshop I've delivered. The science behind workshops is that they don't change behavior. I'm running on the assumption that you will not have a firm command of narrative structure and writing mechanics from just hearing me talk with you and work with you for 90 minutes. Not enough. What I do think it does, this 90-minute time, is that it might get you curious and engaged with the notion of using these kinds of tools. This is kind of like me getting you excited. I'm basically a motivational speaker with like a little bit of educational training. That's basically what I am. I apologize. I'm just going to go ahead and out myself. I'm just a motivational speaker and okay at it, I guess. And all I'm trying to do is get you all excited to do the work. So the homework is designed to facilitate that. It's not because I'm not nice. I am nice during the Future Directions Forum when I'm in my best mood all year. And outside of that, I can make no promises. One thing that I want to mention is that all the resources that we'll talk about at various points during the workshop, I'll highlight a paper or a set of examples or different kinds of things. Those are all in our Dropbox folder, which you can access with this QR code. If you want to just point your camera to the QR code, it'll just point you over there. If not, Leah or Natalie, I sense that you all can get access to the link, yeah, and then just put it in the chat just in case. So, narrative structure. Why is it important? Well, this has become a really important theme over the last few years in science, because most of us, when we consume research, we're reading a paper or seeing a symposium at a conference, and what you often see, for lack of better phrasing, is just somebody barking facts back at you. This and this and this and this and this and this and this. And we all know that when we've read papers like that, or seen presentations like that, oftentimes it's really hard to follow it. Because when we just get information without any coherent structure tied to it, it doesn't take long for our brains to disengage. And that's a shame, because research is hard. It takes years to do all the things that we do. And the presentation, the paper, are basically a culmination of all the work that preceded it. And so if the messaging and the organization of facts in those pieces of work aren't conducive to engaging the audience, they're very unlikely to remember what you said in the presentation, or what you did, or what you wrote in the paper. And so the purpose of these of talks like this is to try to increase the likelihood that you get a really good sense of how to organize the facts that are in any piece of work that you're writing or presenting in a way that makes it easy for the audience to engage with it and remember it once they're all done. And this goes for anything. I mean, you can use the tools that we'll talk about today. You can use them to write papers, to write grants, to deliver a symposium, to put together a podcast, to write a book, write a blog, post tweets. And this is all part and parcel of really engaging communication. And it just so happens that we all see it in our daily lives in a lot of other places. We just don't see it in research as often as we should. By the way, what I just did just now was use the active ingredients so that we're just going to go over. That slide was just narrative structure. I sneaked it in there. My apologies for not being forthright about that. I pulled a fast one on you, but I'm going to tell you right now that those three pieces were in there. If you take nothing away from this talk, it's basic. If nothing else, know that whenever you hear a really engaging story, whenever you see an engaging podcast or a movie, or you read a really great book, and you really liked it, you thought it was engaging, the author of that work did these three things. They set expectations, they violated those expectations, they resolved it for you. And Randy Olson, the author of the book Houston, We Have a Narrative, really great book if you haven't read it before, refers to the template as and, but, therefore. We'll talk about and, but, therefore a lot today. The way Olson defines story, this is the author I just mentioned, is the following: a series of events that happen along the way in the search for a solution to a problem. Every great story you've ever heard does these things. If the social sciences had a law, like gravity, this would be it. This is the thing that is consistent across all aspects of communication. Any effective communication vehicle follows these rules, right? And the reason why those rules are important is that, with few exceptions, some of us keep diaries, right? Some of us, write notes that we'll never share with anybody else, only ourselves. Outside of those writings, we're all really writing to share information that we think we have that others might find value in, right? And those people have brains. Believe it or not, those people have brains. Their brains function very similar to yours in this respect. If your dog knew English or whatever language you're communicating in, and you were practicing your talk in front of your dog or whatever, or your fish or your cat, they're going to recognize that your work better if you use story, if you use narrative structure, if you use and, but, therefore. Because our brains, all mammalian brains, are pattern recognition machines. We love it. We love patterns. Sometimes patterns even make it really hard. Like when it's night and there's a bunch of things in the air that you can't really explain, your brain goes right to, oh, UFO, I'm going to take a picture now. Sometimes patterns can go badly, but this is one place where patterns make a lot of sense to our brains. Our brains tend to disengage when you don't give them much structured information. You're just giving facts at people, boom, 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 boom. That doesn't help us that much. But when you organize those same facts those same exact facts in the following pattern, that one that I mentioned before: set expectations, violate expectations, resolve that conflict between what you set and what you violated. Like those three things together, you can take the same three facts and make it very easy for your audience to interpret it, but also make it very difficult if you rearrange them in the wrong way. Storytelling in that respect is kind of like a Goldilocks zone, you know, like in astrophysics, where they kind of say like a planet is just far enough from a star to benefit from the heat from the star and other a variety of different things to sustain life. That Goldilocks zone is basically storytelling. It's that nice space in organizing facts that facilitate people engaging with what you're communicating and absorbing it and remembering it. So just to set the stage for these storytelling components, because they're very important, they're germane to this discussion. You know, like you know that movie trailer, you know, the guy with the really deep voice that doesn't do the movies anymore because he's no longer with us, unfortunately. You know, in a world where, you know, that guy's trailers were basically the whole movie. In a world is quite literally the setting expectations for that trailer for that movie. And then at some point he's like, but some things have to change. That part in the middle was basically the violation part. It's basically telling you, I'm giving you a trailer to a story that sets up a world for you. In the middle, it ruins that world for you and makes you really sad. And then in the last half hour of the movie, it's going to make it up to you. It's going to give you a happy ending. It's going to make life much better. Like that's basically every great story does those three things: sets the scene, creates tension, resolves the tension. Here's the amazing thing. That's something that scientists can use, but in many respects, we know a lot about narrative structure and storytelling from artists, because artists use this stuff. Only with artists, what happens with their storytelling is, and this is true of a lot of different kinds of artists, songwriters, for instance, great storytellers. You know what a lot of songwriters might say is, you know, it's almost like when I make a song, I'm not even writing it myself. I'm pulling from my environment. I'm seeing bits and specks and essences of ideas that then become songs. And for them, it's kind of like, we don't know where it comes from. It just happens. A really great example that I like a lot. Full disclosure, I'm not a huge fan of the Bee Gees, but they had a documentary last year that's on the screen here that has some really neat examples of where this inspiration stuff kind of comes from with them. And one thing in particular, there's a song that the Bee Gees wrote in the 70s called Jive Talkin', and one of the brothers, because the Bee Gees are three brothers who are all songwriters, got the idea for the rhythm of the song from hearing the tire in the car he was driving hitting over a stretch of highway in Miami for a few seconds every day. They went back and forth from the studio to the house, and the rhythm, the thumping of the tire against the pavement gave him the idea for and he started singing to it every day. And then after a while, there the song came from. So recording artists and all kinds of artists find inspiration in all kinds of ways. It eventually gels into this narrative structure, right? And so in that respect, they have it hard. We have it easy because we get to be inspired by the finished product on their end. The finished product might wind up being narrative structure. Artists find a variety of paths to get there. We don't have to go all those different paths. We can actually use this structure in a replicable, reproducible, predictable way. And by the way, it's not like narrative structure is new to us. If any of us look back to who took a class, anybody here take a class in learning and memory in undergrad or in grad school? You took a class in learning or motivation, or even just an intro to psych class, really, because in those classes, you'll oftentimes hear about this model of learning called the Rescorla-Wagner model, which was developed several decades ago. The graph on the right depicts the conceptual model. You know what the Rescorla-Wagner model is? learning becomes easier and easier the more an expectation is violated from what's observed. So if you walk into a situation thinking a certain way, and you get a piece of information that's like, huh, that's different than I thought. Like that distance facilitates learning. That's all storytelling is. All narrative structure is that same model repeated twice over. You learn something, you come in with an expectation, the expectation is violated, and then and then when you go to the resolution of the problem, that's also a new piece of information that you often get. Funny thing about storytelling, it scales up, it scales down. Storytelling, you see it in one piece of work. You also see it when people are trying to connect a bunch of different pieces of work together, like in movie trilogies. It's no coincidence that in the Star Wars trilogy, you don't hear about Darth Vader being Luke's father until the second one. And you find out that Princess Leia is his sister in the third one. Like all those things are designed to facilitate the storytelling that happens across multiple pictures, not just one picture. Okay, so any questions about narrative structure? Okay, so I'm not hearing anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over several examples of academic writing that are that should facilitate our understanding narrative structure as it relates to the specific thing that we're talking about today, which is using these writing mechanics. Right? And so my main goal is to give you a set of strategies that should help you understand when to apply these writing mechanics when you're trying to write a piece of work that's infused with narrative structure. I'm going to start off really small, talking about abstracts to work, and then I'll extend it to an entire paper. I'm going to start small, go big, and then I'm going to describe why in a second, why we're starting with abstracts in a few minutes. So I'm a big fan of metaphors. I love metaphors. When I was working on this workshop a few months ago, I thought to myself, I'm going to use recipes because I like cooking. And I tend to think that recipes are a really good metaphor for understanding how to connect this narrative structure with writing mechanics. So who here enjoys cooking? Show of hands. Show of hands. People enjoy cooking. Yes. All right. Well, think about your favorite recipe. Think about your favorite recipe. Right. Any recipe that you've ever created has a bunch of ingredients, usually more than 3. Although, when you see the Yahoo thingy with the link that says, like on like the news where it says 3 ingredient ice cream, you're like, yeah, it's just only 3 ingredients. I'm gonna do that. And I'm gonna make a big batch for me, nobody else. So with those rare exceptions aside, most recipes have a lot of things in them, a lot of ingredients. You have to go on a scavenger hunt to find all of them. And in that respect, you can think about like your favorite dish that you really enjoy making. And if you were to pick like the top 3 ingredients, the thing that the recipe absolutely needs, but therefore basically those 3 ingredients. And in many respects, those top 3 ingredients, they don't exist in isolation of the other ingredients. The other ingredients are designed to support those 3 ingredients, those 3 essential things you think that the recipe actually needs. So in that respect, we're going to be talking about, we're going to spend a lot of time on the other ingredients, the stuff that supports the ABT framework, this narrative structure. I think stuffing is a particularly good example. Not that it's like in season. I mean, who on earth wants to eat stuffing now? If you were to if there was a way to sort of make stuffing ice cream, maybe, but not real stuffing too hot right now. But anyway, I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna keep it because it's a really, really good example. So let's just set aside the argument. I love stuffing more than everybody else. Let's just set that aside. If we think about stuffing, we think about like those essential characteristics, like the ABT of stuffing. We might come up with a very different kinds, but my personal opinion is that a really great stuffing recipe nails the texture of it. It's got to have that like that crunchiness, the softness, the kind of chewiness. It's got to like in between all those things. It's got to pair really well with everything else you're eating. You can't just make like stuffing and ravioli and then like maybe like like a fried rice, but you just be asleep for a week. Just too much carbs in one place. So it's got to pair with the other things. And it has and usually a really good stuffing recipe has like an element that's a bit different than other recipes you might have had before. I personally like to make stuffing with jalapenos. Makes it a little spicy, a little different than other recipes that I have. But everybody's got their own little thing. Sometimes they like it more savory. In any event, those are my top 3 ingredients for stuffing. I want to nail those 3 things. You know, in order to get there, there's a lot of other supporting cast members that to get you to the place where you nail your top three characteristics. You know, the celery, you know, interacts with the breadcrumbs they use to create the crunchiness. You know, so long as you pair it with something that isn't too starchy, it also works really well with the main course. And then if you want spiciness, great, but you also need a few other ingredients in there to offset some of the spiciness. Because if it's just jalapenos and nothing else, you're just not going to be able to enjoy it all that much. You also drink too much water to have as much stuffing as you want. So you want to use other ingredients that offset the heat. So see where we're getting with this? That's every single great story you've ever consumed does this exact same things. Yes, there's the and but therefore to the great story, like the one that I go back to over and over and over again for storytelling is the Watchmen series. The Watchmen series is a brilliant treatise on storytelling. You know, all 9 of the episodes connect so well. The ending of it connects so well to everything else. The middle, the end, it does a lot of the things that you see great stories do. And if you think about it, if you think about anything, so let's say you didn't see the Watchmen series, think about anything else you've consumed recently, a podcast you've seen, a movie you've seen, a series you've consumed. If you pick out a single place from that story, like a particularly nice scene you enjoyed, it could have been like 30 seconds or 5 minutes or 30 minutes or maybe your favorite episode. In all likelihood, that moment that sticks out for you in that story stuck out for you because it was purposefully implemented at that exact point in the storytelling to enhance the storytelling, right? Each of those points. And so our papers, you know, that transition from the second paragraph to the third paragraph in the introduction, that turn from the implication section to your discussion to the limitation section, that change from describing your measures in the method section to the data analytic plan, all of those things, all those different decision points, when to do it and how to do it, are all in the service of telling a story. How does this change from this paragraph to that paragraph, this section to that section, you know, this sentence to that sentence? How does that help me tell my story? That is the main thing that those supporting ingredients are always doing. They're always in the service of enhancing the storytelling. We'll talk a bit more specifically about how to get there with the examples that we have. Right? Central question. Rest of our time today, it's all about how does this help me tell my story? For me, one of my favorite examples of how to see this in action, the transitions, are in these 2 YouTube videos. Again, when we go to the Q&A, I'll just post them all in the chat. When I've done this workshop before, I've suggested to people to look at these links beforehand, but we don't necessarily need to do that. I'll walk through each of these things. I'll walk through the main components of these YouTube videos now, but I encourage you to look at them afterwards because it's a really neat. And I'll give you a quick story about how they came about. There's an organization based out of Northwestern called the National Research Mentoring Network, NRMN. It's an NIH-funded research training program that was developed by Richard McGee, who's a bench scientist by training, but now he does all this great work in professional development. And he took a bunch of funded NIH applications and gave them to a colleague of his in literature. That colleague who's the narrator for these two videos, read over all the applications and said, you know, you all tend to write the same. From application to application, from area to area, you know, from goals to goals, like it doesn't really matter. You all tend to have the same coherent structure to how you explain your work and how you get the work successfully funded. So in many respects, these videos are designed to sort of give the audience, who by the way are funded researchers reviewing your application, a sense that you understand how they write. You're in their club in many respects. But I think it's also a really nice treatise on how to think about these transitions and how they work within a body of work. Those videos are just about the summary page, like the specific aims page for these applications. It's only one page of application. Application is much bigger. Why focus on just that part? Well, you focus on just that part. I always you hear a lot of different advice from people about how to write anything, write papers, write grants. You hear some people say, I wait till the end to write the summary. I respectfully disagree with them. I'll stay as respectful as I can. I'll do my best. That is a really bad idea. And it's really bad because these summary pages are a really great place for you to first understand where the structure of your paper resides. Like those shifts, the transitions, the overall goal of the study. If you write the summary page first, the page to your application, the abstract to your paper, if you write that first, and you get to a place where you're like, that makes a lot of sense to me, it's coherent, it's got a narrative structure, I can see the transitions, then all you do is stretch that out, and that's the rest of your paper, right? This is the ideal thing to do first. You have to do this first, because then afterwards, it facilitates the process moving forward. And so what does that process look like in a summary page? We'll start first with a grant, but I'm going to shift very quickly back to papers, right? When you look at this video, the two video links that I mentioned, every well-written summary page of a grant starts off sentence by sentence. You can break it down. These are almost like items. If there was like an and, but, therefore scale, the and, but, therefore inventory, right? The Olson inventory. If there was a measure like that, these would be the items, and they go from beginning to end. So you start off that first sentence of the summary page really tells people what's the overall area that I'm covering here in this grant. Very quickly after that, you transition over to, this is the broad area. This is what we're going to focus on, and that's usually just a sentence. This is what we're going to focus on in particular. That next sentence, that one right after it, you tell them, this is what I'm focused on. This is why I'm focused on. I'm really good at this. I know this narrow area really well. And here's an example of that. And then right after that, you see that green box there, this little green box. You've already set up essentially the and. That's the and portion of everything. When you get to the complication, oh man. So you basically got to this point of like, big picture, narrow picture. I'm really good at this narrow picture, and you know how I know that? I know there's a big gap in this picture. In this narrow area, we really need to know this thing. It's keeping us from doing some really cool stuff. All right, and by cool stuff, I mean like long term. I want to fill this gap and do these really awesome things. That's your long-term goal piece, right? This piece right here. But right now, come on, I'm not ambitious here. I just want, by the way, whenever you write a grant, if you hear that word ambitious from the reviewers, you did it wrong, because they don't want you to do too much or propose to do too much. You got to write a check you can cash, all right? That you don't want to bounce a check here. So what you do is you frame them like, this is my long-term goal. I'm not silly about this. I know I can't do all that in the 3 or 4 or 5 years of this grant. So this is a specific thing I'm going to do in the service of that larger goal, right? See all these transitions, see how they play together? See how they jump, how they bounce in and out of the larger goal of the thing. And then after that specific goal, then you're telling the audience, this is how I think I'm going to get there. Within this narrow goal, this is what I think is happening, right? And this is why I think this is happening. And then at the very end, you're basically reminding them, by the way, I'm really good at this. I made a really good team. Now give me money, because otherwise I'll be offended. So in many respects, all of those different kinds of things are basically that narrative structure broken down into those essential writing mechanics, those turns, the transitions, changes from moment to moment, and phase within the storytelling process. That's all that is. Now that's a grant. That's an entire grant application in the specific games. When you think about papers, it's even simpler, because you're not doing all that stuff in an abstract. You're not telling them how great you are. You're not telling them what the long-term goals are. You're really just focused on a specific story. This is a study I did. This is a meta-analysis I conducted. This is a review paper I wrote. Like you're really just doing 5 of those things. It's even simpler than the process I just gave you, right? And so we're going to go over an example of what this looks like in an actual paper, right? So, on the Dropbox, I have a couple of documents in there. There's a PDF there with like an article, which will only go over the abstract, like the thing. We'll do that right now. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you all about, after we go over that one, we're going to take a little bit of a break, give you about a few minutes to look over a really short paper in Science from now about 12 years ago. That was written by a colleague of mine from grad school, Lawrence Williams, really brilliant writer. I saw this paper when Lawrence published it, and I thought it was just brilliant. And this was several years before I realized what narrative structure was. And when I read it, I was like, this is like a how-to on how to write a science paper. Years later, I realized it's a how-to on how to write a science paper, because it's a how-to on how to write a really good paper. So we'll actually go through the mechanics and some of the transitions that are in that paper too. Yeah. So here's the first example. This is a review paper that my team published last year, and it's a review paper, so it's going to be different. Some of the basic principles are going to be different from an empirical paper, but those mechanics nonetheless reveal themselves in this space. So I'm going to walk through. You take a moment, take about a minute or two to read through this abstract, and then I'll walk you through the sentence by sentence. Yeah, ready to go? Okay, so let's start sentence by sentence. So in this abstract, we start out with that kind of like broad sort of overall goal. So we're thinking about adolescence, we're thinking about social anxiety, we're thinking about where they tend to display symptoms and impairments linked to social anxiety, these interactions with same-age peers. That's the broad context. We narrow down. We start narrowing down. We're not talking about adolescents in general. We're talking about adolescent clients, people who actually need help addressing their issues, and in particular, those to whom we deliver one widely used evidence-based intervention for these clients, exposure-based therapies for social anxiety. We narrowed down even more, exposure-based therapies. But when we get to the recent work on why these therapies work, why these therapies might bring about change, we know that the mechanisms of these interventions appear to hinge on whether or not the exposures are an ecologically valid reflection of real life. Like, these exposures have to look like real life for them to make a dent in bringing about improvements for these adolescents. So this is the buildup. We started out broad, we transitioned to narrow, we transitioned even further into narrow. So we go from adolescents to clients to the therapies to why the therapies work, or why the therapies appear to work. They appear to work insofar as the exposures embedded in these interventions are looking like real life. Here's the complication. When we do these exposures, we don't tend to be able to collect really good data about how adolescents interact with unfamiliar peers their own age. What do these exposures tend to look like? Well, they tend to look like somebody like me practicing with a 14 or 15-year-old, and we're practicing saying hi to me and asking if you want to like talk or go to lunch or grab coffee or something like that. I mean, honestly, I mean, it's not like I'm doing the Jeffrey Mangel thing here. I'm 43 and I look 43. So it's not. I'm not a very ecologically valid reflection of those interactions. Right. That's true for a lot of exposures being done all over the world. Right? And then we get to what are the consequences of the complication. So I just told you, we don't really gather ecologically valid data about this really important aspect of clients' lives. And that's making it really hard to build an evidence base for why these interventions might work when this is the presenting problem. When adolescents within the social world, when they're encountering these interactions that tend to bring them to care, we're not gathering really good data about how things might manifest here. That's hurting the evidence base for these treatments. And this is how we start resolving it. That's the complication. This is what happens. These are all the terrible things that'll keep on happening if we don't fix it. And we found a way to kind of fix it. One way to fix it is to develop a paradigm that can help us at least simulate what these interactions might look like. Not the same. We don't have like a periscope into, you know, we're not like breaking into people's webcams and observing their interactions with people their own age. That sounds ethical, doesn't it? You know, there are a variety of barriers getting here. So this is like our kind of partial solution at this moment to something like this. So develop a paradigm. We think it can partially help. We delve in, and by the way, you see this, the consequently piece. We transition from the complication to a solution. But you see here that before this consequently, this is all the and but therefore stuff, right? This is all and but, boom, therefore. That's therefore is usually the end of a story, right? Therefore is the end, the happy ending. That means it's to start again. So this is the beginning to another story, right? You see that? So the consequently piece is the way that we transition from the conflict to the resolution, but that also requires us to start a new story. And the story begins in the next piece of the abstract with describing the paradigm of the people to be the fake peers in the paradigm. They're trying to mimic characteristics of the kinds of exposures and the kinds of therapies we use, right? And then, what is this paradigm based on? Like just because you just told us how to develop a paradigm, it doesn't mean there's any. What's the evidence? We outline all the different areas of work that inform the paradigm, and then we also detail the various foundations of the paradigm, and also provide people with some data to suggest that we're on the right track. And then the abstract concludes that last sentence is essentially the resolution to the entire thing. But if you have story one, you have a story two, and that tail end of it is basically the closing to both stories together. But each of those, but from sentence to sentence, especially when you're working on an abstract like this, when you've drafted the whole thing, go sentence by sentence, word for word. Like is everything in here in the service of telling the story? If it is, keep it. If not, tinker with it until it gets you into that Goldilocks zone. Any questions about that? I promised I was going to assign homework, and I am a scholar of my word. So here is homework number 1. I would like you to go back to an abstract that you've written for a paper you're currently working on, or a poster you submitted, or something you put together. Whatever it is you're working on that you're really excited about, go back to that paper and diagnose your abstract. Olson has a really great diagnostic strategy. That's the great thing about ABT. ABT is so powerful. You can take ABT, overlay it on any abstract. It could be about anything. It could be about your area of interest. It could be about one of the grad students in your program's area of interest. It could be something on crayfish. It could be anything. And you can overlay that template and maybe say to yourself, I don't know what the work is about, but I understand the structure. And it has this structure. It has an ABT structure, or it has another kind of structure, as a just plain fact structure, whatever it is. The Olson book has a really good exercise relevant to this. And on the Forum on Demand page, I have a workshop in there on the basic, by the broader overview about their structure, and we have that exercise in there too. You know, so go back to your abstract and try to do that. Go back and diagnose the abstract, work on see where the active ingredients are, see where the writing mechanics are, and then use the strategies today to revise the abstract if it isn't in the right space. So if you go back to the stuffing metaphor, you got all these ingredients. They're all in the service of the top 3 characteristics at ABT. So, you know, we learned how to do that with an abstract or a paper, but you know, like I mentioned before, an abstract is just part of that larger whole. And in essence, a really good abstract is basically a condensed version of your paper. If you stretch the abstract out, you should be able to make a really good paper. So we're gonna move on in illustration 2 from the abstract to the entire paper. And we're gonna use a really good example, a short paper. I purposely picked one that could be read or perused just in a few minutes, you know, given our time. So what I want us to do, it is 1:51. If we start like we'll start again like at 2 p.m. I want to give you all a few minutes to read this over. It's no more than like a couple pages, and then we're going to walk through bits and pieces of it all throughout. Okay, let's dig into this illustration. So you should have had enough time to read through the whole 2 pages. We'll focus specifically on the transitions that occurred through the paper's introduction, so to speak. It's a pretty short paper, so getting to the space of the introduction also kind of gets you into through the method of the paper, of the study as well. So when you think about an introduction, do a little more in the abstract that we covered before. Remember that an abstract stretched out as the entire paper, so obviously the introduction is going to go through cover a little more ground, but some of the same essential components are there. So you still have that general narrowing context. You still have the conflict, the complication, the long-term and short-term goals, and the general hypotheses for the study. And you see that play out in the transitions that manifest throughout the paper. So the paper starts out by immediately bringing the audience back in the history of psychology to Ash's work on warm and cold personality traits. So already the audience is gonna go back several decades, maybe several decades before a lot of the work that they currently consume. Right? So you know we're covering a lot of ground here. That's the broad context of the work. And the authors narrow this down, by talking about these warm and sort of warm and cold dimensions, how replicable they are, how we see them in many different parts of the world, all these kinds of things. And then very quickly he gets to, but we don't really know what it means to actually see someone as a warm versus cold person. At the end of the day, these are dimensions that we're applying to our perceptions of individuals. What makes us think someone's warm versus cold? And this is really important because oftentimes these perceptions are snap judgments. We oftentimes make them very soon after meeting somebody. They're kind of like our screening measure for that person, that individual with whom we're interacting. And so, but even if we know that person really well, or even if we've just met that person, we often catch ourselves in using these kinds of terms, like that person greeted me warmly, that person felt kind of icy to me. We often will use these terms, quite a bit, and there isn't really a good reason for why we do that, as opposed to calling somebody else, using some other kinds of terms, which we do use on occasion, but instinctively, it oftentimes looks like people gravitate towards these warm and cold dimensions to characterize others they meet. And this is the part where I absolutely love this part of the paper, because that complication, that why, is resolved in some way, but in the service of making the authors look pretty awesome. So the way they resolve it is, we don't know from prior work, and namely work from Ash, about why we tend to use terms like this to describe people, but he did leave a clue. That part's awesome. I mean, this paper doesn't read that much like a scientific paper. That's why it's so good. In many respects, Lawrence Williams makes himself out to look like Indiana Jones. Like people didn't figure this out for us, but I found a cute clue, y'all. I found a clue, and then check this out. And so he goes out and sort of unpacks the clue. That's his big transition from, why does this happen? Big luminaries in our field didn't really figure it out, but I think I did. Here's where I'm going with this, right? And then what he starts talking about is applying these concepts of warm and cold to recent work, at least at the time, on psychological embodiment. This idea that oftentimes aspects of our environment can have a profound influence, and particular changes in the environment can have a profound influence on how we view things, how we tend to mentalize things. And so he starts giving people a hint about how he's going to test the ideas. So you look at that sentence here. In this way, the feelings of warmth when one holds a hot cup of coffee or takes a warm bath might activate memories of other feelings associated with warmth, like trust and comfort. And he draws from several decades of literature on attachment, on caretaking, on the role of caretaking in producing safe, comfortable environments, right? So he's starting to bring together work beyond Ash, even more recent work. And in that respect, what makes the storytelling here, the transitions really effective, is his ability to go back and forth from old principles and concepts we've known for a long time to new literature that might enlighten our understanding of these concepts and how they are relevant to real-time, real-life interactions in the present day, well after Ash completed their work. And then he also brings the work from Harlow into play, starts talking about contact comfort and these ideas about the need for warmth and contact early on in our upbringing. They starting to give people an idea like these. There's a reason why we use terms like warm and cold to describe other people. It's that from early on in our upbringing, these become viscerally intertwined with our being. That's the argument he's making. And also notes it's not just Harlow that mentioned it, it's not just Ash that mentioned it, Bowlby mentioned it too, Lorenz mentioned it as well, that all these things are really important for our upbringing. It's been there since the dawn of when we were born and raised. It's not a surprise that it's also present when we view and interact with people in real time, even as adults. And so the idea is that, you know, and the other nice thing is he even goes even more recently. If you even when you look at work in the neurobiology of attachment, you see these same themes, you know, applying to using other kinds of indicators of warmth and acceptance and comfort and things like that. And that buildup allows, once he's made the case across several decades of work, across several lines of work, using both you know, well-established principles and recent work, that allows the authors to then transition over into the hypothesis. For these reasons, both theoretical and empirical, you know, we hypothesize that mere tactile experiences of physical warmth should activate concepts or feelings of interpersonal warmth. You know, and that it should be even just influence behavior, the judgments of other people, the behavior of you towards other people, essentially a prime. And the introduction was in the service of building up the rationale for testing this priming effect of activating warmth and coldness. So you know, the key message with that introduction is that, you know, individual sections, those individual sections of each of the papers have ABT embedded in them. And in that respect, the writing mechanics are serving throughout the paper. They're in the service of building each of those little mini stories. Like I mentioned before, the storytelling narrative structure is like a cell in our bodies, the scales down to the cellular level scales up to the entire body, right? So it's a really a powerful technique because it can scale up and down like that. And with every great story, you see the entire expanse of the story, the gestalt of the story. But even when you drill down to individual pieces of the story, you'll see many stories in there as well. And the mechanics are working throughout that process to facilitate the storytelling. So I'm going to go through a couple of different things about different papers, but I'm going to bring up that empirical example. I might just do it just now. So like if we were to, you know, to think about this in terms of reviews and book chapters, you know, you just basically describe in the abstract is like how you outline the remainder of the paper. That's how you might do a chapter, and the review paper that I mentioned before is kind of for an example like that. You know, so the mechanics for this kind of thing, I mean, essentially, the opening of that abstract will be covered beforehand. That's the key setup. That's like basically the opening of that review paper. The next section of the paper goes into describing what the paradigm is about, providing an overview of the literatures that inform the paradigm. You know, detailing those foundations. Each of these sections are basically sections of the entire paper. Like detail the conceptual and empirical foundations, highlight important directions for your research, report data, and then this last sentence is basically the closing of the chapter. It's basically how this entire paper would look like when stretched out. I'm going to go over an empirical paper example, like an abstract from an empirical paper. You know, but one thing I can say is that when you think about applying this abstract example to like different pieces of empirical paper, like methods and results sections, you're basically using the abstract and the order in which you describe things to then figure out, okay, how am I going to describe the methods and the results? Here you might relax use of narrative structure a bit, especially in the method section, because the method section isn't really designed to tell a coherent story. It's really designed to give a reader the plan to replicate your study if they want to. That's the goal of a method section, is to give people your plan. This is how I designed the study, so that when somebody can just go back and follow it step by step if it's told clearly enough. And then people have probably heard this metaphor before, like the funnel metaphor, that the introduction flows broadly and then goes narrow, and then a discussion does the opposite. Starts narrow, flows broadly. That's kind of like what the discussion section should look like. It should be the inverse flow of what your introduction basically provides. Here, read this example. I'll give you all about a minute to read this abstract. This is an abstract to a paper that we published a few years ago in behavior therapy. Actually, one of the first papers where we started applying the storytelling structure consistently throughout the paper. And this is a really neat paper in that respect. But in starting an empirical paper, you're doing a lot of what was in that review paper example. You're starting off with the broad context of the work, so these social anxiety assessments, and you're narrowing down a little bit in the sense that, like, you want the reader to know that you're looking at social anxiety, particularly in these non-home contexts, these peer interactions. And the complication when you're thinking about these peer interactions, where a lot of social anxiety symptoms and impairment happen with these adolescents, the complication is that you have these current methods that are quite difficult to apply to collect peer data, and then you really need it, because the other data we tend to use when we're trying to administer social anxiety assessments can't really get at that anxiety in that non-home context. That's the kind of stuff that parents, for instance, who are commonly relied on to in these social anxiety assessments, they just don't have a lot of opportunities to look at these, to directly observe these kinds of interactions. And so, Abby was right in that in a sample of 89 adolescents, that's kind of like the therefore to that first story, but it's also starting a new story. And that's one thing that probably distinguishes a lot of empirical paper abstracts from review paper abstracts, because the consequently at the beginning is in that like fourth sentence, it's also starting the process of detailing the method section, because it's basically the therefore is also the aim, which is also a place where you're kind of talking about the methods from the get-go. From that fourth sentence that it's a sample of 89 adolescents. It's a mixed clinical community sample. You're collecting these data from different people and from novel informants, from these unfamiliar peer confederates. By the way, it's the same paradigm as the one that I described in that other paper. And then, as you walk past that fourth sentence, you go to the fifth, sixth, and seventh sentences. You're basically like taking steps through the method section, describing some of the measures, describing the experimental paradigm where you collected the peer data, right? And then after you've given the reader just enough information to understand what the study design looked like, that's the end of your method section, really. And as you notice there, the method section doesn't have a ton of that and but therefore stuff in there, because method sections are supposed to do it. They're supposed to give people a plan for how to replicate the study, not necessarily engage the reader like an introduction, results, and discussion section might do. And so as you get to the results, you start unpacking what the patterns of correlations among the informants reports are, and there's like a bit of an and but therefore right there, like we saw these patterns with these informants, but those patterns to the other informants. And then the next sentence is, because that conflict, usually when you see those patterns be different, you might say to yourself, oh, that means somebody's data isn't any good. It's like, actually not so much. If you go to the next sentence, they all gave us some good data. They all told us something that valid data does, which is like tell you the difference between adolescents who requires an assessment from those who don't. So clinical group and control group, we could distinguish them. We could use their ratings to predict stuff that adolescents do in those interactions, right? And we start walking the reader through some of the conflicts, some of the seeming conflicts that are in the results section, and we resolve them by showing patterns of other kinds of data. And then the discussion piece, you know, like if you get to the sentence here where it's like these combined R's, that's kind of the place where you're resolving a lot of that tension. You're showing them a different pieces of data that seemingly conflict with each other, but then we're like, it looks like it conflicts, but then when you realize these patterns of correlations don't look that much different than other patterns of correlations that we know from past research, it starts to make a lot more sense. And sort of in that respect, you know, it allows you to then see what the implications of the findings are for the larger literature. So as you can see here, these abstracts of empirical papers share some commonalities with the abstracts you see in review papers, with some noticeable differences. You know, that like you're telling the aim of the study a bit, or you're telling the aim of the paper a bit early on than you would in the review for example. Like at sentence 4, you're telling people what you're going to do. You're going to walk them through a little bit of the message section, just enough for them to interpret the results. You get to the results, and to the degree that the findings in there, might seemingly conflict with each other, you can leverage ABT to sort of organize the reader's thinking. You might report ABT in that respect might give you a strategy for thinking about which order of findings to place in the abstract. And then the discussion sort of wraps it all up in a bow and just gives you the take-home messages of the work, connects it to prior work if possible, and then discusses the implications of it. Any questions about that? I want to make sure to give myself some time to sort of highlight the take-home message from the second illustration. Homework. So, you know, going back to the illustration for number 2, remember we were going through more of the paper, not just the abstract. How do these principles, how these random mechanics play out in other portions of the paper? You know, for homework, I would say go back to a paper you're working on right now and take a look particularly at the discussion and the introduction section. So they have those active ingredients of story. Does it have ABT? And are there ways for me to leverage these writing mechanic strategies to further support the storytelling? Great. Well, thank you all for your time. We're about to start the award ceremony. Leah, do you have the link for that? Do you want to put it in there in case folks want to see it? I heavily encourage you all to go see it. There's some really neat work we'll learn about in the next 90 minutes. Okay. All right, buddy. See you soon. Take care.